Riley, thanks for watching us tonight. Big breaking news day led by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals out west, upholding the stoppage of President Trump's immigration order, and that is the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. So let's cut through all the mumbo jumbo. It'll give you a headache. And let's cut through all the political hackery. Here's what's really happening. The Trump administration believes that terrorists and nations with no central control can get to the USA in a way that is far too dangerous. Hypothetically, an ISIS killer could board a plane in, say, Tripoli, Libya, with a fake passport, then fly to Paris, 2-hour flight, change planes, fly on to New York City. Nobody in Libya will vet that man, so he would arrive here with a decent chance of entry. Therefore, the president wants to impose stronger security oversight on nations like Libya and 6 others that are essentially in chaos. Federal law seems to favor the president. Section 212 states, quote, "Whenever the president finds that the entry of any aliens or any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may by proclamation and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens," unquote. Law seems pretty clear. So, President Trump suspended immigration in 7 countries for 90 days. For Syria, he also stopped refugees from entering until further notice. Enter the states of Minnesota and Washington, where the attorneys general challenged the travel ban, saying it harmed individuals and businesses and was unconstitutional because it targeted Muslims. Federal judge in Washington then blocked President Trump's order, and just 2 hours ago, a federal appeals court upheld the block unanimously. Why? The 3 appeals court judges basically ruled that there's no urgency to stop travel from the 7 countries, and that there are strong arguments on both sides of the question that should be reviewed by the courts. The judges also wrote that no irreparable injury would be caused by a state of the president's order, and that the court should eventually decide whether the order is constitutional. The judge is basically saying more legal vetting is needed of the terrorist vetting plan. A lot of vetting. Talking Points believes there is more than a little political motivation in this case. No question Minnesota and Washington State took the action because of liberal politics. They believe President Trump is anti-Muslim. As for the appeals court, it's impossible to say with certainty what motivated their decision. If you take them at their word, they simply want more legal hearings on the matter. President Trump says the decision to block is purely political and that his Justice Department will take it to the Supreme Court. I say good, good. Let's see if federal law as written, and which is pretty clear, means anything anymore. Let's see. In the meantime, anyone coming here from the 7 nations cited by President Trump can expect a substantial wait at the airport. And that's a memo. Now with the top story reaction. Joins in Washington, Elizabeth Wydra, an attorney and president of the Constitutional Accountability Center, and Ken Cuccinelli, former Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Am I leaving anything important out, Mr. Cuccinelli?
No, I think in terms of the high points, you hit the high points very well, Bill. And I think that when this is all said and done, whatever legal course it is, once they get to the merits, President Trump is going to win overwhelmingly on this, just because of the breadth of the presidential authority in this area. And this court has essentially violated the separation of powers by restraining that.
Okay,
it's
but
very unfortunate.
What you're saying is speculation, and as you know, the Supreme Court is a political body right now, divided, 4-3 to 1, Justice Kennedy being the moderate.
Right.
But what I'm most interested in, Ms. Wydra, and you're coming at it from a more liberal point of view than Mr. Cuccinelli, is that the law is fairly clear, that the president has the authority to do this. Barack Obama did it in Iraq. Bush the Younger did it. And yet the judges are really kind of skirting that law, trying to find a way around it, are they not?
Well, so I think what you left out, what Mr. Cuccinelli left out, is something incredibly important, the Constitution. While it's true that the president has authority over immigration and national security, he must exercise that authority in compliance with the Constitution. And that was one of the most important messages from the Ninth Circuit ruling
everybody
today.
trots out the Constitution. Be
It's
specific.
kind of important.
Be specific in what Mr. Trump is not doing constitutionally.
Yes, well, first and foremost, he claimed that his executive order was not reviewable by the courts. And this is something that I think he's getting an education in the way that the structure of democracy works.
That teed off the judges, no doubt. That was a foolish statement to make if you were trying to get your ban back in place. But constitutionally, the law is pretty clear. And as you know, Congress makes the laws, not the judges. The law gives the president authority to suspend alien immigration if he deems necessary.
In compliance with the Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law.
But you still haven't told me where the Constitution is running that off the road.
Well, here you go, Bill. So the court said tonight that there was a likelihood that Washington State would succeed on its due process claim. This is the part of the Constitution that says that your important rights cannot be taken away without due process of law.
What rights are we talking about?
So
the rights of the people in Somalia, in Yemen?
The Supreme Court has said clearly that the Due Process Clause applies to both citizens and non-residents alike.
Non-residents, that means somebody in Yemen, all right, has a right.
That's not accurate.
To the American constitutional
process? It certainly is. Landon versus Placencia. Look it up.
It isn't.
But also, there's an important Establishment Clause question about religion. You can't discriminate on the basis of religion and national security.
Nobody has proven that there was any religious aspect to this at all. It was aimed at terrorist nations.
Even this court declined to rule for against the Trump administration on the Establishment Clause. This
they didn't
ruling
consider
does not
it,
address
but they
that.
said there are serious concerns. And frankly, Rudy Giuliani said on this network that Trump came to him and said,
anybody
I want
says
a Muslim
anywhere
ban.
doesn't really matter. What matters is what is written. And you know that as an attorney. I'm not smart enough to be an attorney, but even though I know, it's what's written, not what's said. And it looks to me, Mr. Cuccinelli, I'll give you both 30 seconds, that the judges are trying to find a way around this law as stated.
Yeah, the due process was the cornerstone of the court's decision tonight. That's what they used as their benchmark. And yet they gave due process rights to people who do not have due process rights. People in Somalia who've never been to this country, people in Syria who've never been to this country, they don't have due process rights. They don't have constitutional rights of any kind. And rather than restrict the restraining order to those who arguably might have such rights, they left this extraordinarily broad temporary restraining order in place, now really
debate on it.
Now the Trump's position ought to be to withdraw the order, break it up into 4 or 5 different orders in consideration of what the court said, so you can get 99.9%.
I'd like to see it go.
But it will eventually.
I gotta go.
It will eventually.
All right. Ms. Wyder, last word, please.
So I think that tonight we're seeing the vindication of the Constitution, both with respect to structure and with fundamental American values.
Nice to see a leftist who likes the Constitution again.
All right. Very good debate, counselors. Thank you. Next on the rundown, dishing the Trump family because of the president's politics and more analysis of the immigration order just out tonight. With us now, Judge Jeanine Pirro. So I got a little confused with Ms. Wyder saying that people in Yemen and Libya have constitutional rights even though they're not on our soil.
Well, you weren't confused. You were right. I mean, the reason that made no sense to you is because if you're from Libya or Somalia, you don't have constitutional rights. You see, that's the problem with the left. The first thing they start claiming is that, oh my goodness, the reason that it's wrong is it's unconstitutional. That's hogwash.
Okay, but if they were here, they would have constitutional rights.
That's right.
Anybody on our soil.
Right.
Okay, now, the ruling in general is basically driven by, hey, there's no urgency here. And so the president, you know, we need to see this, we being the legal system.
Right.
We need to take a look at this. And to me, I mean, they're not upholding the stated law.
Right, they're not. They're not. And you quoted the law perfectly in your talking points. And a judge should have the scales of justice in front of him or her, which should be the national security or the security of the United States and the interest of the plaintiff. The interest of the plaintiff, the state of Washington, is not primary. In fact, the state of Washington doesn't have an interest. It's some students from another country in the state of Washington that does not tip the scales. And let me tell you something, Bill. The reason that the state of Washington is suing is because they know know that the appeal goes to the most liberal,
But one of the
most
judges is a
left-wing.
Republican appointed by Bush the Younger. So
Right.
it's too easy to just dismiss it in a knee jerk.
I
but
can
I'm
dismiss
going to
it
make a
in a
prediction
knee-jerk.
here and stun the world. The Supreme Court is going to throw this out because Washington State and Minnesota don't have standing to bring it.
That's exactly the point.
That's what they're going to do.
They don't have
They're
standing.
going to throw it out.
And by standing, that
Right.
means that they do not have a direct, immediate interest.
Right.
It's a third-party interest, maybe, as opposed to the interest of the United States of America, the people, the citizens. You're going to tell me, Bill, that a citizen of another country who we don't even know, whose country won't even tell us who that person is, has primacy over the United States citizen, and that the President of the United States has to tell a federal judge why under Section 8 of Article 2, Article 1 of the Constitution of the United States that your last guest couldn't cite, has the primacy and gives the president the power? That's hogwash. The Supreme Court will give Trump the win on this.
Even though it's for liberal justices, even though?
Yeah, I think that the liberal justices understand the Constitution.
All right, we'll
this is
see.
not a close one, Bill.
Okay, now tomorrow night on your fine program, Saturday night at 9 o'clock.